Hey, if you're watching this video, you're interested in learning about Laravel. That's awesome. Laravel is the best framework I've ever used, and it has so many amazing features. But sometimes when you're just starting out and learning something brand new, all of those features can be intimidating and overwhelming. And it feels like a lot of tutorials out there try to teach you 100 different features and 500 best practices and tips and tricks spread out across 400 different files, when really you're just looking for a beginner's tutorial to keep it simple. Anyways, learning about all of those features and best practices, that's fine in a 20-hour video course, but in an intro YouTube video like this, you don't need to learn every best practice and cool feature that exists in a framework. In a video like this, you're probably just trying to wrap your mind around what Laravel is and how to genuinely understand the very basics and get started, right, with a really minimalist example app. So my goal is not that you'll be a Laravel guru by the end of this video, but simply that you'll have a bird's eye view of how Laravel works at the most basic level, and that it will actually make sense to you. Now, before we get started with the action, let me show you a sneak peek preview of the finished product of what you and I are going to build together in this video. So when you first visit the homepage, you have two options. You can sign up for an account or you can log into an existing account. Let me just go ahead and log in with an existing account really quick. Once you're logged in, it says welcome and then your name. You can click log out. We don't need to do that right now. You can create a brand new post. So I'll say like post for example video. Here is my content. I can go ahead and create the post. And then down at the bottom, we see my posts, and it's just going to list all of the different posts you've created. Now for each post, you can edit them. So if I click edit, if I want to add exclamations to the content, click Save Changes. There you see it. Or if I want to delete this post entirely, I can click Delete, and now it's gone. Cool. And now as far as features that we can't visually see right now, we'll also set things up so that you only have permission to edit and delete your own posts, right? You can't just go around deleting other people's posts. Cool. Now I should also be clear that this video is not an installation or dev environment setup tutorial. I've already posted a different video on my YouTube channel that shows you how to get PHP and Composer installed and ready on your computer. So you can find a link to this video in the description for the video you're watching right now, but essentially by the end of this video, we have everything we need and we actually learn how to set up a brand new empty Laravel project from the command line. So the video you're watching right now assumes that you have that ready to go and that you know how to do that. If you don't know how to do that, that's okay. You can go watch this video first. So long story short, the video you're watching right now is not about setting up a dev environment. This video is about actually understanding Laravel. So at this point, we are ready to get started. Here's what we're going to do. On my desktop, I have a brand new folder. It's completely empty. And I just named it YouTube Demo. You can name your folder whatever you want, but let's go ahead and open up that folder in VS Code. So here it is, it's completely empty. I'm gonna jump into the command line, and with the command line pointing towards that folder, we're gonna say composer create-project, and then it's Laravel/Laravel, and then a space and a dot to just say, hey, we want to install this in the current directory that we're in right now. Let's go ahead and press enter. This should only take maybe 30 seconds, but it will be very quick. You can see that that's going to automatically generate all of the files and folders that we need. Now, as soon as that finishes, you can go ahead and say PHP artisan serve. Go ahead and press enter. And now with that up and running, it's just going to continue to run until you tell it to stop. So with it running, in your browser, you can visit localhost:8000. So you're going to see a page that looks something like this. This is the default Laravel starter screen. For a first step, I think it's always empowering to just make a quick edit to the page we're already looking at right here. So to do that, back in VS Code, just go into the resources folder and then the views folder, jump into welcome.blade.php. So for example, if I just search for the word wonderful, the text that says Laravel has wonderful, blah, 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 maybe I'll make it so that sentence ends with a bunch of exclamations instead of a period. And if you refresh, there you see the exclamations. Cool. So we can edit that template, but what if we wanted to create our own brand new template? So do this with me. In that same views folder, let's create a brand new file. So new file, you could literally name it anything, but why don't we name it like home and then .blade.php. So the home portion of the name could be anything, but then it does need to end with .blade.php. Cool, now in this file, let's get a starter template. So you can type doc in VS Code and hit tab. In the body area, let's just say, heading level 1, testing 1, 2, 3. Let's go ahead and save that file. And now, if you refresh, obviously Laravel doesn't know to do anything with that new file we just created. So here's what we're going to do. Go into your routes folder and jump into the file named web.php. You're going to be spending a lot of time in this file. This file essentially spells out what should happen for all of the different URL patterns on your website. So when you send a GET request to the base URL, like the home of the domain, just /, it's going to return that Blade template or that view, the file that was named welcome.blade.php. So we could change this from welcome. We named our file home.blade.php. You don't need the .blade, just the starting part of the name. If you save that, now if you refresh, perfect. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and delete the welcome.blade.php file. Cool. So at this point, let's jump into our home.blade file. And instead of this heading level 1, let's set up a user registration area. Now, this video is absolutely not about CSS or Sass or Bootstrap or Tailwind or Emotion. So we're not going to worry at all about CSS or styling. So I'm literally just going to create a div, and you would never do this in the real world, but I'm going to give it, style equals border, 3 pixels solid black. In this box, so this will be like the user registration area. So we can have maybe like a heading level 2 that says register. And then we could have a form. For now, we can leave the action to blank, but in the form, let's have an input. Let's say placeholder equals name. And then let's have another input, and placeholder equals email. And then finally, an input, and placeholder equals password. For password, you can change the type to password instead of text. And then finally, still in the form tag though, let's have a button that says, register. So you can save that. If we refresh, cool. So that was just basic HTML. This had nothing to do with Laravel. Now the question is, how do we actually tie this into a Laravel application? Like, how would we actually let the user register for an account, sign them up into a database, generate a session, so on and so forth? Well, let's not get too many steps ahead of ourselves. Let's take this one step at a time. So before we worry about the database or sessions, let's first just learn how to submit and access form data in Laravel. So to do that, back in our HTML, on the opening form tag, let's fill in the action, right? And that's the URL that this form is going to submit to. So let's say / and I'm just making this up, but like /register for the URL. Let's add an attribute of method and put that to post. At this point, we can go ahead and save this file. And now let's jump back into our web.php file. Right, this is the file that lives in the routes folder. This is what says what should happen for all of the different URL patterns on our website. So this is the baseline route. Right below that, let's say, uppercase route, : when someone sends a post request to, and then in these parentheses, we're going to give it 2 arguments. So the first argument is just the URL pattern. So quotes, /register. That's what we're looking out for. The second argument is a function that you want to run, at the appropriate time. So let's spell out an anonymous function. So function, parentheses, curly brackets, and let's just return, a string of text that says, thank you, semicolon, give that a save. So if you submit this form, right, it doesn't matter what you put in the data, you could actually just leave it blank, but if you click register, aha, I'm glad we ran into this error together. So essentially, anytime you send a post request in Laravel, in order for it to actually go through, you need to include a CSRF token. Explaining what CSRF means is outside the scope of this video. Essentially, it just means that we're protecting the visitors of our site from having third-party sites take advantage of their logged-in cookie data from our good innocent site. The good news is that Laravel makes it really easy to implement, and you don't need to understand CSRF in order to be protected. However, if you do want to learn a little bit more about cookies and CSRF attacks in general, I've already created another video on my YouTube channel. So here it is. You can just search for, my name, and then here's the title of the video, and that has all sorts of good info. Anyways, back to the task at hand. How do we get around this error message? Simple. Go back into your HTML, so our blade file, and right inside the opening form tag, let's just say @CSRF. Now, obviously this wouldn't do anything in plain HTML, but because we are within a blade template file, we have access to this @ symbol, and then we can call different utilities and tools like this. So if we save that, and then if I refresh and just submit the form again, beautiful, we see thank you. Now, we don't want to literally just respond with the words thank you. We would want to, look at the data that they actually submitted in the form. Now, before we get to that, I do want to include one little bit about staying organized. So back in our router file in web.php, we've seen that yes, you can include an inline or anonymous function here for a route. Clearly that's what we're already doing, but in order to stay organized, it's much more common to include these functions in a totally separate file. And that separate file that I'm referring to would be called a controller. So the idea is that you can split up the functionality of your application into different controllers. Like we'll have a user controller, and then we can have a blog post controller, so on and so forth. But the idea is that you're tucking away those functions into those separate controllers instead of this web routes file becoming bloated, with hundreds or thousands of lines of code. So let me show you what I want to do right now. Let's essentially split this function into its own file. So this has to do with registering a user. So why don't we create a user controller? Let me show you where controllers live. So in the app folder, and then in the HTTP folder, and then in the controllers folder, we only have this default controller.php, but in this folder, we want a new file. So check this out. In the command line, you can go ahead and open up a second terminal. So leave this one running, the PHP artisan serve, but open up a secondary terminal and type this in with me. PHP artisan make : controller, and then we just make up the name. Let's call it user controller. There is nothing special about this name. I'm just making it up. Go ahead and press enter, and you'll see that in the controllers folder, we now have this brand new file, usercontroller.php. Let's jump into that file and check this out. Down here in the class, we see this comment. Let's create a brand new function. So let's say public function. You could give it any name you want. I'm literally making this up, but why don't we call it register? I think that's a fitting name here. So parentheses, curly brackets, and literally just return a string of text that says hello from our controller. Semicolon, give that a save. Now here's what we're going to do. Back in our routes file, the web.php file, let's use that function here for the /register page, or I should say URL. So for this second argument, get rid of this inline function, right? So now it's just, our first argument, comma, we'd be ready for a second argument. Here's what we're going to do. Give it an array, so square brackets. In that array, we're going to give it 2 items. So the first item is our controller class. So we're just going to say user controller : class. The second argument, or not an argument, I should say, the second item is in this array is the name of the method on that class. So we just made up a name of register. Now, before we can save this file and expect it to work, we do need to import or load or require in our user controller. Now, there's a 99% chance you don't have the same exact VS Code extensions that I have installed, so you can ignore this step, but I'll explain how it makes sense in about 10 seconds from now. But if I just right-click on user controller and click import class, that automatically added this line at the top of the file for me. Now, you don't have that ability to right-click, but what I want you to, I'll show you how to get it in just a minute, but what I want you to do is just pause the video and type this in at the top of your web.php file. And do note that these are backslashes, not forward slashes. Go ahead and save this file. Now, before we test this out, I want to show you how you can also have access to just right-click on something and choose import class. Essentially, in VS Code, click on this extensions item in the left-hand menu, and then you just need to search for this item, or this extension. It's called PHP Namespace Resolver. As soon as you have that installed, you'll be good to go, and then you can right-click on things just like I do and click import class. Also, just another tip, to improve your blade support in VS Code, I really recommend this extension as well. It's called Laravel Blade Snippets. Cool. Anyways, at this point, let's go ahead and save the web.php file, and now let's test it out. So if I go back and submit the form again, perfect. Hello from our controller. So this means that we're successfully leveraging this function in our controller. Now, we don't actually just want to say hello from our controller. Let's actually start to do something useful. Here's what we're going to do. Let's try to access the data that the user types into these fields. So back in our controller, within the parentheses for our function of register, let's include a parameter. In the parentheses, we're going to say uppercase request and then $request. So what this means is we're filling in the metaphor for what a request is with the incoming data, that the user actually typed into these fields. Now, we're able to use uppercase request like this because we've already imported it, or I should say the boilerplate code that Laravel created for us is already importing it here. So within the body of our function, before the return line, let's say this. $, let's make up a variable. We could name it anything we want, but I'm going to call it incoming fields equals, and then we can leverage, $request. So $request, look inside it for a method of validate. Now, in these parentheses, we're going to spell out an array. So square brackets, and then I like to drop down, and I'm just going to say that all three of the fields are required. If you leave one of them blank, I don't even want to move on. I don't want to proceed any further. I'm essentially just going to reject your request, and you're going to get redirected back to this form. So in the array, I'm just going to say, name should be required, comma, I'm going to say email should be required, comma, I'm going to say password should be required. So if this validation fails, Laravel will take care of things for us. It won't even move past this line. So the user would never even get to see hello from our controller. We can test this out. So if you save that and then, for example, like if I leave my name blank but I fill in these other two fields, I click register, see it just kicks me right back. I don't even get to see that string of text message. But if I do fill out all of the fields, if the validation passes, whoops, you can see it still fails, and that's simply because we forgot to name these inputs in our HTML. So let me show you how to fix that. Back in our Blade template, on these inputs, you would just need to give them matching names. So like name equals, name or the username. This one would be name equals email, and this one would be name equals password. This has nothing to do with Laravel. This is just a standard with any backend server, just HTML forms and servers in general. Right? These will be available on the post body data that the browser sends over, and it's required that you name them. Cool. So if you save that and then you refresh, if I leave one of the fields blank, you see it kicks me right back. But if I do indeed fill all three fields out and click register, perfect. Hello from our controller. Now before we move on, let's set up more specific validation. So back in our controller, for the name or username field, instead of just quotes with required, you can actually give this an array, so square brackets, and you can spell out multiple rules that must be met. So like quotes required, but then comma, quotes, you could say like min:3. It needs to be at least 3 characters. You could say comma, quotes, max:10. Let's do the same thing for email. So instead of just required, let's actually give it an array. So the first item is required, but then comma, it must be in the email format, right? So like a string of text and then the @ symbol and another string of text. For password, let's do the same thing. So an array, yes, it's required, but also let's give it a minimum length of, let's say like your password needs to be at least 8 characters long, comma, and let's say at maximum it can be 200 characters long. Cool, so you can save that and we can test it out. So like if I choose a username that's only 2 letters long, click register, you can see it kicks me back. Now don't worry, in a real project, you would learn how to have validation messages that would appear next to this specific field that's having a problem. But again, we're not worried about learning every single feature and every best practice in Laravel. That would be a 20 to 30 hour course. Let's just keep things really basic in this quick video. Anyways, if I choose a username that's 3 characters long, and I type in a value that looks like an email address, and I choose a password that's at least 8 characters long, then we are successful. Perfect. So we've learned how to validate the data. In just a minute, I can show you how to access those values that the users typed in. But before we get to that, let's realize that we would want to store those values in a database somewhere. So I'm going to assume that you already have MySQL installed on your computer. If you don't, that's okay. There are already 50 billion tutorials on the internet and on YouTube on how to get MySQL installed on your computer. All right, this video is about making sense of Laravel, not installing MySQL. But anyways, on your system, let's just create a brand new MySQL database. So I'm going to create a schema. I'll just name it, YouTube demo. Go ahead and click apply. Cool. So now I have this brand new database. It doesn't have any tables in it yet, but let's go ahead and connect our Laravel project to this MySQL database. So here's how we do that. In VS Code, you're just going to look for your file that's named .env. Around line 11, you'll see the details related to your database. So for me, the database name, I just chose it, right? YouTube demo. You'd have to choose in, value that makes sense for you. My local dev username is just root, and the password is the super secure root. Cool. Go ahead and save that file. And now before we actually tie in our user controller to the database, we first want to make sure that our database has some of the basic tables that Laravel will set up for us. To do that, we're just going to run a command. So in the command line, just type this in with me, php artisan migrate. Go ahead and press enter. And what that's going to do, if you go back into your database and refresh, you now have several tables. So Laravel will create these for you: failed jobs, migrations, password resets, personal access tokens, and aha, the most important one, users. So if I look at that table, right, it's got ID, name, email, password, so on and so forth. So what we want to do now is just take whatever values the user types into these fields and actually create a row in this users table. Here's how we do that. Back in our user controller, before we return, hello from our controller, but after we're validating things, we would just want to create a new instance of our user model. Now, we haven't discussed what a model is, but big picture, a model is like a metaphor or a way of mentally mapping out the data for an item. So you're going to have a model for a user, you're going to have a model for a blog post, you might have a model for like blog post comments, right? But a model is just sort of mapping out the data structure, the relationships for a piece of data. Now by default, Laravel already has a user model for us. So it's uppercase user, colon, we're going to use its create method, semicolon. In these parentheses, we give it our $ incoming fields, right? This is the data, whatever the user actually typed into these fields, that we would want to fill in the metaphor for what a user is with. Now before we actually go save and test this out, before that line, let's be sure to hash the user's password. We would never want to store the user's actual simple plain text password in a database. That is just about the worst thing you could do. So here's what we're going to do. Right above this user create line, let's say $ incoming fields, look inside that array, so square brackets for the password item. And then we're just going to say that that equals, and then Laravel has access to the bcrypt function. We don't need to import it. We just have it available as a global utility function. So in these parentheses, just give it the plain text password so that it can hash it. So that's $ incoming fields, look in the array for quotes, password. Cool. Now before we save this, we also need to right click on uppercase user and click import class. And then up here, that's going to give you a choice. We want this one that's app models user. So if I click that, you can see it automatically added this line for me. Cool. Let's go ahead and save this and test it out. So back in the browser, let me refresh and actually choose values that I want. So I filled those in. Let me click register, hello from our controller. But here's the cool part. If you go into your database and refresh the view for that table, beautiful. Stored all my data, and most importantly, it hashed my password, right? Clearly, that is not the value I actually typed in as my password. So now if your database ever got leaked, you wouldn't be revealing the passwords for all of your users. Cool. So now that we've learned how to store a user in the database though, now let's think about the concept of having a user be logged in, right? You should be able to log in and log out. That involves sessions and cookies. Now, currently, we just successfully registered, but we're not actually logged in. So let's go back to the home page, and let me show you what we can do so that when you register, you just get automatically logged in. So first of all, on this line where we're saying uppercase user : create, this is going to return an instance of a user, and we don't want it just floating in outer space. We want to sort of hold on to it. So at the start of this line, I'm going to make up a variable. You could call it anything. I'm just going to call it, lowercase user equals whatever this is going to return. Cool. So we've held on to this. Now on a new line, we can say, call the globally available auth utility function, and then look inside it for the login method. Now, which user do we want to log in? You guessed it, this user that was just created. So $user. Finally, instead of returning a string of text, let's just redirect them back to the homepage URL. So you can just say return redirect, semicolon. Where do you want to redirect them to? Quotes, just the homepage base URL. Before we save this, let's add a detail where the username and the email must be unique, right? So Laravel can look in the database and make sure that no other users have those items, or I should say that value. So for name, just add one more item in this array, so comma, and then uppercase rule, : unique. And then we're just saying on the users table, comma, the name field needs to be unique. In order for this to work, we do need to right click on uppercase rule and click import class. And we want this one, illuminate validation rule. Cool, and then I would do the same thing for the email address. So comma, rule, : unique. On the users table, the email field must be unique. Cool, let's go ahead and save this. And now, to really test that you're logged in, let's go adjust the homepage blade template that we're going to redirect the user back to once they register and are logged in. Let me show you what I have in mind. So back in home.blade.php, right up at the top, right below the body tag, let's say @auth, and then have a blank line, and then say @else, and then @end auth. So the idea is whatever we include here will be shown if the user is logged in, right, with a cookie in a session. Otherwise, else show them this. So what I'm going to do is just cut and paste this div for the registration form. Just cut that to live inside this else area right here. But if you are logged in, let's just have a paragraph that says, congrats, you are logged in. Cool. So if you save that and you refresh, right, obviously we're not logged in at the moment, so we see this registration form. Go ahead and register though. So I filled out the forms with a username of Brad2. Let me go ahead and register. Cool, it redirected me back to the homepage URL, and there we see, congrats, you are logged in. So in Google Chrome, I'm logged in, but here's a different window. This is Mozilla Firefox, and if I visit localhost : 8000, you can see I'm not logged in. So on that exact same URL, I see the registration form. Let's go ahead and set things up so that when you are logged in, there's a button that lets you log out. So here's how I would set that up. Maybe right below that paragraph in this auth section, I would just have a form for the action. Let's send the URL to /logout. Let's say the method is post. In the form, literally all we need are two things. We need the CSRF token, and then we need a button that gets clicked on. So let's just have a button that says log out. Cool. Let's go ahead and save that. And now we need to go create a route for this URL pattern of /logout. So go into your web.php file. Down at the very bottom, let's say, route : post. We know that we give this two arguments, right? So this is the first one, then the second one. So the first argument is the URL pattern, so /logout. The second one is an array. This is how you point towards a method on a controller. So we're going to say user controller : class, comma, and we can add a method on the controller. We can name it anything we want, but I'm going to name it logout. So save that, then go into your user controller. And now on our class, we have the one public function named register. Right above or below that, but inside the class, let's just create another public function. This time we're going to give it a name. We're making it up, logout. In the body of this function, we're just going to call the globally available auth function and look inside it and call the logout method. Then we're just going to redirect back to the homepage URL. So return a redirect of just /, give that a save. So in this window, I'm logged in. If I refresh, now I can click log out. As soon as I click it, Awesome. Cool. So our registration form works. You can log out. Now, on this guest screen, we need to have a form where you can log in to an existing account. So first of all, let's add the HTML form that would let you log in. So back in home.blade.php, down in the else area, I'm just going to duplicate this div that has the border around it. Just duplicate it. On the new copy, let's change the heading level 2 to say log in. And then let's change the action URL to be /login. Cool. We do not need the email field, so we can delete that. And let's actually change the name of this field. So let's call it like login name. And then let's change the password to be, for the name value, login password. That way we don't have two of the same field with the same name on the same page. Cool. And then on this button, let's have that say login instead of register. Cool. So if you save that, you get the idea. Now, how do we make this form come to life? Well, it's going to submit to this URL of /login. So you already know what to do. We're going to go into our routes web.php file, and you can literally just duplicate this line for the logout route. Just duplicate it, change the URL pattern to /login, and the method on the user controller would simply be login instead of logout. So we can save that, then jump into your user controller, and right above this function, let's just create a public function with the name of login. Now, we do need to access the value that the user types into these fields. So here's what we're going to do. In the login function parentheses here, let's fill in the metaphor for a request with $request. In the body of the function, I'm going to begin by creating a variable. You could name it anything, but incoming fields equals $request. Call its validate method. Give it an array. I'm just going to say that both login name is required and login password is required. If you don't include both of those, I'm not even going to bother attempting to log you in. Assuming you do have those then, let's actually attempt a login. So if parentheses, curly brackets, below the if block, whether the login attempt is successful or it fails, we're going to want to return a redirect back to the home page. But for the if condition, we're trying to see if the username and password they supplied is a match. Is there actually a user in the database with that matching username and password? So here's what you do for the if condition. It's call the auth function, look inside it for its attempt method. In the attempt method, you're going to give it an array. We're going to give it two things. The name that they're trying to log in with and the password value they're trying to log in with. So we'd spell out an associative array. So name would be $incoming fields. Look in that array for, and we named it login name. In between the two closing curly brackets, comma, you're also going to give it a password. So quotes, password. Building out an associative array, this would be $incoming fields. Look in the array for login password. Cool. So now only if that is successful, then we do want to generate a session and a cookie and, consider this user logged in. So to do that, we would just say $request, look inside it and call the session method, look inside that and call the regenerate method. Give this a save and let's test it out. So let's fail the login attempt on purpose. So if I just type in values that obviously are false, it just redirects me back to the home page and nothing changes. However, if I log in with correct values, so Brad2 and the password I just chose, I log in, awesome. Congrats, you are logged in. It's still the same homepage URL, but now we're seeing the content that only logged in users can see. And as soon as we click log out, perfect. Really quick, let me log right back in. So now that we have this interface where logged in users can visit, let's go ahead and set up the ability for them to create blog posts. Now, if we look at our database, you'll see that yes, Laravel has preconceived notions right out of the box of what a user is. Right? It has a user's table, a user model, the shape of the data, right? It already had its own opinion that they should have a name, an email, a password. So Laravel already knows what a user is out of the box, but Laravel has no idea what a blog post is. Or really, beyond a user, Laravel doesn't know what anything is. So for any other type of data on your site, you need to spell out the shape of the data. Like instead of blog posts, if you think your website was like a pet adoption agency, you'd have a table named pets. And the shape of the data would be like the name of the pet, the species of the pet, the fur color of the pet, the favorite food of the pet, so on and so forth. Now, before you just start manually creating a new table, called posts and setting like a title column and a body content column, don't do that. In Laravel, there's a much more organized and easily repeatable and replayable process of creating database tables. Let me show you how Laravel handles this. It's really cool. It's all automated. So in the File Explorer, if you look not in app, but in database, you'll see that there's a folder called migrations. Now, Laravel ships with these migrations by default out of the box. So it's going to create a users table, these different default tables. However, you and I can create our own brand new migration file right now. So what we're going to do is say, hey, Laravel, we want there to be a new table called posts, right, for blog posts. But you and I don't have to create the table ourselves. Laravel will do it for us. So how do we create a new migration file? Simple. Go ahead and open up your command line and run this with me. We're going to say PHP artisan make migration, and then we just give it a name. What's really cool is if you follow a specific naming format, Laravel can sort of read your mind as to what you're trying to accomplish. So if we name it create_posts_table, go ahead and press enter. You're going to notice that now in the database migrations folder, there's a brand new file with today's date called create post table. And if you open up that file, beautiful. In its up function, you can see it's going to create a table with this exact name of posts. And then if you roll back the migration, it's going to drop that table. Now, in this up function, this is where we spell out the shape of the data. So in addition to the ID column in the timestamps column, so that's going to give us like ID and then the date that the item was created at, for example. In addition to that, we would want to spell out other fields like the title of a blog post and also the body content of a blog post. So maybe right below this line where it says table timestamps, I'm going to say $table, look inside it, and I'm going to call the string method and give it a name of title. Cool. Then let's say $table, look inside it, and call the long text method and give it a name of body, right, for the body content. And then finally, each blog post should keep track of which user authored it, like who's the author, who created the post. So finally, we'll say table, look inside it, call the foreign ID method. At the end of that, look inside it and call a method of constrained. So what this is going to do is Laravel is not even going to let the operation go through when you create a blog post if this matching ID does not actually match a real user in your database. So the name for this foreign ID that would point towards a user would just be quotes user_ID. We'll see where this comes into play in just a moment. But at this point, I want you to save this file. Okay, and now you won't see a new table magically appear in MySQL. We do need to run a command. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to run a command of php artisan migrate. So what this is going to do is it's going to run any migrations that have not yet been ran. So if we push enter, it's just going to run our one migration that we just created. And now if you refresh your MySQL database, you'll see a brand new table named posts. And if you look at the shape of the data, beautiful. We've got ID, but most importantly, title and body, and the user or the author, the person who created the post. Now that we have this database aspect taken care of, let's go back to the HTML side of things. And when you're logged in, let's have a form that says create new post, and it lets you type in, a title and body content. So back in our home.blade.php, up towards the top, this is the content you'll see if you're logged in. So for example, right below the form, but before the else, let's just have a div with a border. So I'm just going to borrow this, copy and paste it, and then let's have a closing div. And let's have a heading level 2 that says create a new post. And then let's have a form. The action, let's have the URL submit to /create-post, and method will be post. In the form, so let's drop down, we want to begin by saying @CSRF, and then let's just have an input for the title value. So input, hit tab, text, yes, but let's give it a name of, title. Okay, then let's have a text area for the body content. So the name would be body. We don't need ID, columns, or rows. And then you could add placeholder values. So on the title, you could say, placeholder equals title, or post title, whatever you want to put here. And then on the text area, you can say placeholder equals, like body content, ... Cool. Finally, below the text area, let's have a button that just says, save post or create new post, whatever you want to have. Let's go ahead and save this. And now before we even submit the form, we would need to pay attention to what should happen when you send a post request to this URL pattern. So let's go back into our routes file, right? The web.php file. And so far, it's just been leveraging anonymous functions or methods that live on the user controller. At this point, though, let's stop and think about it. So the user controller is for registering, logging in, logging out. We should probably have a separate controller called a post controller that's for all blog post related tasks. So, and this is just to stay organized, but here's what I'm going to do. Let's run a command of php artisan make controller. Be sure to spell controller correctly. And I'm going to choose or make up a name of, post controller. Go ahead and press enter. And now that's going to create a new file in app http controllers. There it is, postcontroller.php. Now, if you're anything like me, it's a bit slow and annoying to dig through a folder structure like that. So if you're using VS Code, a way faster way of finding these new files, like, assume you just ran that command in your command line, you can immediately find the file by pressing Command P on Mac or Control P on Windows, and then just literally start searching for postcontroller.php. It's going to be the first suggestion. Just hit enter. Beautiful. Okay, in this post controller, in the actual class, let's get rid of the comment. Let's have a public function named, well, we can make up the name. The name doesn't matter. Let's make up a name of create post, parentheses, curly brackets. You don't even need to save this file because we're going to jump right back into it. But let's go into our web.php file. And down at the bottom, let's spell out our blog post related routes. Now you could even have a comment if you wanted to, right? Blog post related routes. So you could say route : when someone sends a post request to, right, we're going to give it two arguments. The first is the URL pattern of /create-post. And then the second argument is the function that we want to run in response. So give it an array, post controller, : class, comma, the second item in the array. We named the method create, and then we uppercased the P in post. Now, before we save this, you want to right click on your post controller here and click import class. That automatically adds it up here. Cool. Let's save this file and then go back into your post controller. Now, how do we actually access the values that users type into these fields? Simple. In our function parentheses here, we're just going to say, fill in the metaphor of a request with $request. And then in the body of our function, I'm going to type really quickly because we've already done this in the user registration and login process. But I'm just going to make up a name, incoming field, set that to equal $request, call its validate method, give that an array. I'm going to say that the title field is required. I'm going to say that the body field is required. Okay, next, I don't want to let people store any sort of actual code in my database like HTML tags or any kind of malicious content. So I'm going to strip the content before I actually save it into the database. So I'm going to say $incoming fields, look in the array for the title. I'm going to set that to equal to and then call strip tags and then just feed it the original value. So incoming fields, look in the array for title. Now to save typing, I'm just going to duplicate that line and change title in both instances to body. Okay, let's also fill in the user ID, right? If you look at the database, the user ID, this should match the ID of the user who's creating the blog post. So if you look at your users table, right, has your name, your email, let me refresh that, right? There's Brad and Brad too, has their email addresses. Well, each row, you can see each user has a unique ID number. So that number represents that unique row. That user ID is what you would want to store as the user ID value on a blog post row. So here's what I would do. Down here, I would just say $incoming fields, look on the array for user_ID and set it to equal, and then just call the global auth function, look inside it, for the ID method. Cool. Now at this point, this array of properties, incoming fields, it is ready to be saved into the database. So I'm just going to say uppercase post for the post model, : create. Right? Just like when we created a new user or registered a user, we said uppercase user : create. Now in these parentheses, you just feed it the data you want to save, so $ incoming fields. However, before we save this file, we have to realize that Laravel doesn't have a built-in model for a post. Yes, Laravel had a built-in model for what a user is, but we need to create the model ourselves for what a blog post is. Or, if you had a pet adoption agency, you would need a model called uppercase pet. So how do we create a post model? Simple. In your command line, just say php artisan make : model. And now you don't want to just make up a name. The name here matters. So before we run this command, if you look in the database, right, we chose the database table name of lowercase posts, plural. So to have this automatically be linked to our model, we want to choose the singular uppercase version of this. So if our database table is lowercase posts, our model would be uppercase post, just like this. Go ahead and press enter. And let me show you what that just did. In your app, and then in your models folder, you now have a file, uppercase post.php. So now, that's what this code can reference, uppercase post. So now you could right click on uppercase post, click import class, beautiful. Below this line, let's end things by just redirecting back to the home page. So return, redirect to the home page. Let's give this a save, and now before it's going to work, we do need to go into our post model. So in the models folder, go into post.php, and let me explain what we want to do here. Actually, if you go into your user.php file as a reference, you'll notice that around line 20, Laravel already included this for us on our user model. So Laravel was just saying, hey, when you're creating a new user record in the database, these fields, these can be mass assigned. You can assign these values all at once so that it's easy and convenient. So we would just want to do this same thing for our blog post model. So literally in our post.php model file, right below this, in the actual class, I would just say protected $fillable equals an array, and then I'm just going to spell out title, body, and user underscore ID, semicolon. Let's give that a save. Cool. Now we might have missed one other tiny detail. I don't know. I'm just doing this off of memory. Let's find out. If we run into an error, we can fix it together. So if I go back to the home page and I fill in, say my first post, here is my content, and I click save post, it redirects me back. Let's see if it actually worked though. If we look in your MySQL database and refresh the post table, beautiful. My first post, here's my content. And because I'm logged in as the Brad2 user, my user ID is 2. So for example, if I create another post, another Brad2 post, hello, and I save that, look in the database, cool. Both of them have a user ID of the Brad2 user. If I log out and I create a Barksalot account, I register, and now I create like dog post number 1, and you go look in the database, beautiful, that new post has a user ID of 3. So now you can see we're already keeping track of this relationship between a user account and a blog post row or record. So with that relationship between a user and a post in mind, I think our next bit of business should be on this logged in homepage content area right about here. Let's display any and all posts that the logged in user has created. Now at this point, I think the concept of what a model is probably one of the cloudiest or most confusing concepts we've covered in the video so far, right? What in the world actually is a model? And we said that it's sort of a metaphor for a type of data, but I think what we're about to do is going to make a model truly make sense. So one of the most important features of a model is explaining the relationships that it has with other models. So if we want to display any blog posts that the current logged in user has, let's just go spell out the relationship between a user and a blog post in our user model file. So check this out. Do this with me. Jump into your file that's named user.php. To remind you, that lives in app and then models, and it's user.php. Now, down at the bottom, but still in the overall class, So inside this closing curly bracket, but maybe just right below this protected line, so right about here, let's say public function, and you could name it anything you want. Like oftentimes it would make sense to just name it posts, but just to drive home to you that the name doesn't matter, I'm going to name it like users cool posts, parentheses, curly brackets. In the body of this function, here's what we're going to return. We're going to return a relationship between a user and any blog posts that they've created. So return $this, look inside it for the method of has many. I'll explain this syntax in just a moment, but in these parentheses, we're going to give it two things. The first is the class that you're trying to create a relationship with. So it sort of reads like a sentence. The file we're in is a user.php. So we're saying that a user has many blog posts. So what goes here? Just the blog post class. So uppercase post, class. Now you might think that, hey, we need to right click on post and import it. We actually don't. Because this is such a specific use case, Laravel can figure out where that model file lives. Anyways, this second argument, this is the field on this item in the database that spells out the relationship. Like what piece of data is actually powering this relationship? And if you look on a blog post row, it's this. It's this column that's, user_ID. That's what's powering the relationship. So quotes, user_ID. Let's go ahead and save this. And now let me show you how we can leverage users cool posts, this new function. To do that, let's jump back into our web.php routes file, because remember up at the top here for the homepage URL, we're actually not pointing towards a method on our user controller. That's okay, we can just spell out a function right here. Now actually, in just a minute, we can leverage that users cool posts function on our user model, but first, let's just pretend that, oops, let me log back in really quick. Let's pretend that instead of showing the blog posts for the current logged in user, imagine we just want to show all blog posts from all users, because doing that is a little bit simpler and then we can move forward. So it's really easy to load all blog posts from the database. Within our function, we would just use our blog post model, so uppercase post, : and then it has a method of all. Semicolon, let me right click on post and import that class. Okay, so this is going to return all blog posts, but we don't want that just floating in outer space. We want to pass that into our Blade template. So here's how you can pass data into your template. The first argument is the name of the template you want, but then you can give it a second argument and you just give it an array of data. So let's spell out an associative array. Imagine we want the variable to be called posts, and then this symbol for an associative array value. And now you could just cut and paste this to live here, or you could assign this to a temporary variable like this. You could say, $posts equals that, and then you could just reference that here. But the idea now is whatever name you chose here, you can use this in your Blade template. So check this out. We can save this, and then back in home.blade.php, maybe below the create new post div, let's just recycle this to have a div right below that. Close that out. The heading level 2 can say all posts. And now to loop through a collection, you would just say @ for each. Parentheses, and then we're looping through our variable of posts as, and then just make up a singular name. So like, there's nothing special about this. I'm just making up, post. Then we can say, @ end for each, but now in between those two lines, we can loop through our collection here. So for example, let's have a div for each blog post, and maybe I'll just give them a gray background. So style, background, color gray, padding 10 pixels, margin 10 pixels, and then we can say, H3, have the title, so just double curly brackets to output a bit of text in Blade. And we just look inside our post for title, and then maybe below that just have the body content. So $post, look inside the array for body. So let's go ahead and save this, and now if we refresh the home page, cool. So we see all blog posts from all users. But what if we only wanted blog posts where the current logged in user is the author? So I'm logged in as the Brad user. I shouldn't be seeing this dog post by Barks a Lot. Well, there are several different ways we could set this up. Let me show you the first way that does not use our relationship, because I think that'll make you appreciate how useful the relationship is. So back in our code, back in our web.php file, instead of just using the all method on our post model, we could say where, and then where user ID, comma, is the ID of the logged in user. So you can call auth, look inside that, call ID. And then after we call where, you want to be sure to call get. Now if we save that and I refresh, perfect. Instead of seeing 3 posts, now I just see the 2 that are actually by, the logged in Brad user. However, even though this works, this is missing the entire point and the entire power of setting up relationships. Because in this line of code we just wrote, we're beginning our metaphorical sentence from the perspective of a blog post. But why don't we instead begin the sentence from the perspective of our user model? So check this out. You could delete this line entirely. I'm going to comment it out just so we can compare and contrast. But let's say, $posts equals, and then let's use our user model. Now, instead of using the user model as a whole, let's actually use the current logged in user, the instance of a user. So you can just call auth and then call user. That's going to return an instance of the user model, the user that's currently logged in. So if that's what we're working with, that means we can now call, back in our user model, remember we named the function users cool posts that returns that relationship. So we can just call users cool posts and then look inside that and call latest, because we want to order them by the date, right? We want the newest blog post on top, and then finally we'll call get. So now if we save that, and you will need to be logged in. If you're not logged in, you're going to get an error message when you refresh. But now you can see we're only getting the blog posts for the logged in user, and they're ordered, with the newest ones on top. Now, to get around that error if you're not logged in, here's what you could do. You could begin by saying that posts equals just an empty array, and then wrap this line, and you can get rid of this line now. The idea is just this one began from the perspective of a blog post. This one is beginning from the perspective of a user. So it feels a bit more intuitive, right? And we're not having to spell out the query parameters. Our relationship has already taken care of that for us. But we could get rid of this line and then just wrap this line in an if statement. So you could say like if, the condition would just be if auth, and then call the check method. So only if you're logged in do we want to get blog posts for the current logged in user. Cool. So I can refresh, beautiful. And in this window, if I logged in as Barks a Lot, I actually spelled the name wrong as Barskalot, but let me log in. Beautiful. I only see the one blog post for the user that I am. Cool. At this point, let's go ahead and add edit and delete buttons for each blog post that you see when you're logged in. So let's start with our Blade template. So in home.blade, maybe below the body content, I would just have a paragraph. And inside it, I would just have an A element, so a link. And the href value would be / and I'm just making this up, but let's say like edit dash post. And then this would be like the ID number of the specific blog post that you're trying to edit. Right? We're just going to take them to a different screen where you can change the title and body content. So to make that dynamic, I would just have, double curly brackets, and then I would just look for the current post for its ID value. Cool. And then the text that you actually click on here can just say edit. Below that, let's have a delete button. Now a delete request is a little bit different. This is just going to perform a GET request to a new URL. For a delete request, we're not going to send a GET request. We're probably going to send either a post or ideally we're going to send a delete request. In other words, in order to perform that kind of an action, you need a CSRF token. So let's have a form. So form, let's make up a URL for the action. Let's send it to, / delete post / and then the post you're trying to delete. So double curly brackets, $post, look inside it for ID. Let's be sure to include method equals post. In just a minute, we can learn how to actually send a delete request instead. So check this out. Inside the form, as always, we can begin with our CSRF token. However, Laravel has a really cool feature. So normally with HTML forms, you can only send GET or POST requests, right? But with JavaScript, you can send asynchronous requests, you can send delete requests or put requests. Well, with Laravel, even though it's just a traditional HTML form, we can actually say @method and then just say delete. Cool. Let's also obviously have a button that says delete. Let's give this a save. So now when you refresh, each blog post has edit and delete functions. Now let's set something up so that you can actually use these buttons. So let's begin with the edit button, right? Currently when you click it, it's going to take you to /edit post and then the ID for that blog post. So we need to set up a URL pattern that's watching out for this. So you know what to do. Just go into your web.php file. We have, blog post related routes. Let's just set up a brand new one. So when you send a GET request to /edit post / and then curly brackets, this is how you set up a URL variable. And let's just say post. So the idea though, this is going to be a number like 1, 2, 3. Okay, then comma, an array, post controller, : class, comma. Let's have a method name of like show edit screen. Let's give that a save, and now let's go onto our post controller and create a method with that name. So in post controller, up here I just say, public function, I named it show edit screen, parentheses, curly brackets. Now, here's the cool part. In these parentheses, we can fill in the metaphor of what a post is with the incoming post variable in the URL pattern. Now here's what's really cool about Laravel. If the name you choose here matches the name you chose for your, the dynamic part of your URL, Laravel is going to perform the database lookup automatically for us. So now in the body of our function, we didn't even do anything and we already have lowercase, $post that is the correct blog post. So in the body of our function, we can just return a view, and we haven't created the new blade template yet. We can in about 10 seconds from now. Let's name the new blade template like edit-post, semicolon. Let's give this a second argument of the data that we want to pass into the blade template. So we would have an item, I'm just naming it post, you could name it anything, but then arrow symbol and just give it $post. So the cool part here is Laravel is going to see that number that's coming in from the URL. It's going to fill in the metaphor for what a blog post is, right, on our model. So it's going to perform the database lookup for us. Now in our blade template, we'll have something called, $post. So we can save this. And now let's go create the new blade template. So in resources, and then in views, I'm going to create a new file in the views folder. Let's name it edit-post.blade.php. I'll just type doc and hit tab to get a bit of starter, but then in the body content, I'll have a heading level one that says edit post, and then below that I'll have a form. The action can be /edit post / double curly brackets, look inside it for the ID. But the idea is that this time this form will perform a post request. So when you submit this form, it's going to have the new title and body that you would want. Inside the form though, let's start out with a CSRF token. You could absolutely leave this as a post request, or with Laravel we can say, method put. But let's have an input for the title. So name equals title, value equals, so we want to pre-populate it with the existing title value. So double curly brackets and then $post, look inside that for title. And then below that, let's have a text area for the body content. So the name would be body. We don't need ID columns or rows. And then the existing value in between the text area sandwich, just double curly brackets, $post, look inside it for body. Then below that, let's just have a button that says, save changes. Let's give that a save, and now if you refresh the URL, right, when you're trying to edit a blog post, beautiful. It's pre-populated with the title and the body content. So now we just need to set up the request, the URL pattern, for when you actually send a put request, right, when you would submit the form. So to set that up, just jump back into web.php, and to save a bunch of typing, we can literally just duplicate this line we just wrote. So I'm just going to duplicate it. On the new duplicate copy, we just need to change the type of the method for this request. So instead of a GET request, right, the URL pattern is the same, but it will be a PUT request. You want to update or put a new entity at this same URL. And then obviously the controller method name, instead of show edit screen, you could have a method like, we're just making up names here, but it could be like actually update post. So with that in mind, let's save that, jump back into post controller, and let's have, a public function named actually update post. So once again, in the parentheses, you would say uppercase post, $post. We'd also want a second argument, so comma, and it would be, uppercase request, lowercase request. So this gets us the blog post that we're trying to update. This gives us the incoming form data, right? Like whatever the user actually typed in for their new values. So back in the body of our function, and first of all, we need to do the same thing for this function as well. If you're not the author of the current post, you shouldn't be able to perform either of these actions. Right, like this blog post is a Brad blog post. So if the Barks-a-Lot user tried to view this screen, like if I took this URL and then in Firefox, so when the Barks-a-Lot user tries to visit this URL, it should just redirect them back to the home page instead. They do not have permission to even view this edit screen, and they definitely should not have permission to submit this form. So on the show edit screen, you could just wrap this in an if statement. Ideally, if this was a 20-hour course about Laravel, or if I was going to make a follow-up video here on YouTube, you would use something in Laravel called a policy, and you could use middleware to perform this same exact feature, and that would be cleaner or more organized. But in this simple video, we can just write an if statement right here. We can say if, parentheses, curly brackets, just say if auth user get the ID. If that does not, double equal sign post user underscore ID. So essentially, if you are not the author of the current post, let's just return a redirect back to the home page. Oops. Okay. But if this doesn't happen, that means you are the author of the post, so then this is fine. I would just do the same thing in this function, the actually update post function. So you could just literally copy these lines, paste it right here. Cool. So if you're not the author of the post, what do we want to do? We want to actually update the post. So the first thing I'm going to do is validate the incoming title and body fields to make sure they're not blank. So, incoming fields equals request validate. Give that an array. We'll say title is required. We'll say body is required. If you wanted to, you could strip out any tags from those values. We've already learned how to do that in our create function down below. So I won't bore you with that, but I can just paste in those lines that we've already gone over. And now we just want to actually update the correct entity in the database. So now here's what's cool. Laravel has already given us an instance of the post model for this current, the appropriate blog post. So we can literally just say $post, and then it has a method on it of update. So we don't need to write a SQL statement, and then you just give this the data. So $incoming fields. And then finally, let's just return a redirect back to the home page. I realize there's about 100 different ways you could set this up so it's cleaner, so you wouldn't have to type this same line here and here, but I'm just sort of thinking on the fly and thinking out loud, so the code is not perfectly organized. But let's test this out. So first of all, if Barks-a-Lot tries to view this URL, perfect. Barks-a-Lot doesn't have permission. It kicks them back to the home page. The Brad user, though, if I refresh, cool. Now imagine if I want to add like 3 exclamations to the end of the title and to the end of the content. I can click Save Changes, and there you have it. We actually performed that update. Beautiful. Now let's go ahead and set up the functionality so that you can delete a post. So I'd start out in our web.php file. To save typing, I just duplicate this line at the very bottom. And on the new copy, the type of request is a delete request, and the URL pattern is delete-post, and then the ID number of the post. Let's change the method name. So instead of this, it would be, and we're just making it up, we can make up a method name of like delete post. Let's give that a save, jump into our post controller. Let's, on our class, add a new public function called delete post. In the parentheses, right, let's fill in the metaphor of what posts we're talking about, $post. In the body of this function, let's perform that same check, right? Like, are you actually the author of the post in question? So I would literally just copy these 3 lines, paste it in, and then, so we don't have to type this in again, here's what you could do. Change the condition to if it's true. So like, instead of exclamation equal equal, we could say like triple equal sign. So if you are the author of the post, and then we could move the redirect to be below this so that it'll run either way. But only if you're the author, then actually delete the post, right? So we would just say $post. The model has a method on it. We don't need to create it, of just delete. And this is actually a great opportunity to go over the fact that Laravel models, they have awesome functions built into it that we don't even have to set up, right? Like create, update, delete. But you can add your own functions to models, right? Like on our user model, right? We added the function named users cool posts. But you and I didn't have to spell out, a public function called create or update or delete. Beautiful. Let's go back to our post controller. So with that saved, if we refresh, and imagine I want to delete this post that says, another Brad 2 post. Click delete. Perfect. It's gone. For our final detail in this video, let's set it up so that next to each blog post title, it says by and then the author's username. Because this is one final example for us to, again, learn what exactly a model is doing or why models can be so useful. So to get started on this feature, let's jump into our Blade template, our home.blade template. So home.blade.php. Here's the heading level 3 with the blog post title. So you could imagine it would say like, by and then the username. There's just one problem. We can't say, $post, look inside the array for like username. Because remember, if you look at the database for the post table, all we have on the post table is the ID for the blog post, the date that it was created, and then the title content, the body content. We don't have the username. We just have the ID of the user account. So, you could say like user ID. That's just going to give you a number, like a numerical value, right? If we refresh, by the user whose ID is 2. So the question is like, how would we actually look up the appropriate user row in the database? Like if you look at the users table and go, aha, the user with that ID, their name is Brad2 or Barks a Lot. How would you look that up in the database? Well, the cool part is you and I don't have to look that up in the database. We don't have to write a SQL statement and perform a join. We can just use the power of relationships in Laravel. So check this out. Let's begin from the perspective of a blog post. So that's the model that we would go edit. So let's go edit our post model file, right? Post.php. At the bottom of our class, I'm just going to say public function. You could name it anything. You could name it unicorn, but I think it would make sense to name it user. So parentheses, curly brackets. In this function, we're just going to return a relationship. So return $this, look inside it for belongs to, semicolon. And now you can read this as a sentence. The file that we're in is a post. So we're saying a blog post belongs to a user. So we're going to give this function 2 things, a comma b. The first thing we give it is just our user class. So user : class. The second thing we give it is the column that is powering the relationship. So that is quotes user _ ID. In other words, Laravel is going to see this, and now Laravel can perform that lookup in the database for us. Laravel can write the SQL statement and perform the join for us. So with this in place, just save it. Let's jump back into our Blade template. Okay, and now we don't want to put out the numerical value. Here's what we want to do. Let's, in these double curly brackets, you can completely empty them out. We want to begin with our post, look inside that for user, and then you could look inside that for anything. The name, their email address, but we would want just name. So we can save that. If you refresh, beautiful. So hopefully the idea of what a model is starting to take shape in your mind. The model is sort of this abstraction layer between what we want to do and the database. It has functions for creating, updating, deleting, but also we can add our own functions to a model to power relationships. And that is going to bring this video to a close. If you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy my 14-hour premium Laravel course. In the full-length Laravel course, we set up a social networking app where you can follow other users, have a homepage feed of the users you follow. You can upload an avatar image for your user account. We set up a live chat room feature. We set up a live search results overlay feature. We learn how to automate different tasks in Laravel so that they can happen, every 5 minutes or every 5 hours. We learn how to send an email when a user creates a blog post, just all sorts of different features of the Laravel framework, right? In a more comprehensive project that feels a bit more real world. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy my full course. You can get lifetime access to the course for the cost of about 2 trips to a cafe. In the description for this video, you can find a link to my coupons page with heavily discounted coupons to join all of my courses. And you can see the newest one is the Let's Learn Laravel, a guided path for beginners. Thank you so much for watching this video until the very end. I hope you feel like you learned something, and stay tuned for more web development tutorials.